A lot has happened over the past week or so. Kyle Rittenhouse has decided, against my advice, to publish a book that, although he thinks otherwise, casts shadows on his family, especially his mother, Wendy. The book raised the ire of David Hancock, who, to his credit, had up to that point decided to back out of the whole Kyle Rittenhouse dealio. If you don't know who he was Kyle's chief of security and general mentor for much of the time before and after the trial. Furthermore, Kyle's family was horrified by what they read and said so on Twitter. That's where I first learned of problems in the land of doors and horrors. In this video, I will explain my involvement and read a tweet from David Hancock that I think summarizes my views on Kyle and his new book better than I can. Hello out there. I am trying to get through.
With cold, blunt analysis, cradled in the warmth of reasoning, it's time for Johnny Walker Dread to straighten you out on a thing or two. Emanating all the way from exciting Las Vegas, Oklahoma, it's the Johnny Walker Dread Show.
So let me first explain my involvement. After Faith Rittenhouse, Kyle's sister, posted her heart-wrenching rebuttal of Kyle's book, Kyle DM'd me with a direct copy, asking me to confirm that the book treated his family quite fairly. Yes, you heard that right. Kyle was under the impression that his book portrayed his mother and sisters in a positive light. So I read the book and I couldn't believe it. There were passages in the book that I knew would embarrass the hell out of his family, especially his mother, once the book was released. There were also massive formatting problems, misspellings, style inconsistencies, and odd paragraph constructions that made the book come off as a junior high essay. I blame this on the writer, of course, Michael Quinn Sullivan. There are also assertions in the book that will come back to haunt him in future litigation, and for that I blame his lawyers. I hurriedly asked him if it was too late to make edits, and he told me that they still had to undergo final proofreading before it shipped. Now, keep in mind that I thought at this time that the book was only available as an advance copy to a select few. I did not know it was already available for sale electronically. The idea that they would push out a digital version of the book with its horrendous content is baffling to me. Did they not have a professional writer like me look it over before selling it? Amazing. I DM'd Kyle with a long list of problems with the book, urging him to take action. He simply refused to respond at all. A week goes by and I still hadn't heard from him. At that point, I figured there was only one thing left to do. Go public with my concerns about the book. As I figured it, if he heard my criticisms coming from my mouth, then that might spur him to take them seriously. Well, no dice. Faith then asked if I would let her be on my show to tell her side of the story. I had previously interviewed her mother and sister, and she evidently liked the way that Neil Kernan and I treated them. Neil on social media goes by V-Radio. She agreed to let Neil co-host, and so we set it up. Faith was wonderful. If you'd like to watch that interview, I have posted a link in the description below. Shortly after the interview, Kyle blocked me. Well, he also blocked Neil. We seem to be joining a long list of blocked supporters, including his sisters. Now comes David Hancock. He had grown increasingly agitated at not only Kyle's book, but also Kyle's unwillingness to come to terms with its contents. In his view, the book was loaded with lies about what happened in Kenosha. We talked over the phone about his claims. During that conversation, he mentioned some wild shit about the drone and FBI footage and how it was handled by the lawyers and the law. I told him he'd be welcome to come on my show, as well as Neil, since we co-host, and explain what happened. He agreed. We haven't set that show up yet, and I'm hoping that David is still interested in doing it. Now, yesterday, David stated on Twitter that he was going national with his claims, which, I'm not going to lie, are pretty astonishing. I responded that I didn't think it was a good idea, which spurred a lively and agitated response from his wife. Okay, I must admit that caught me off guard a bit. Well, this afternoon I read the following on Twitter from David. Clearly, this book was rushed to print at a time when Kyle is still quite confused, angry, and unsettled. And I would also add, young. We must not forget that Kyle's book is the kind of immature thing that I might have written when I was 20. I don't think I would have published it, especially if adults around me had warned me of its long-term repercussions. But who knows? I was pretty dumb when I was 20. Shame on the adults close to Kyle that appeared to care more about their proximity to Kyle and the perceived social, political benefits they enjoy than actually helping Kyle contextualize what was happening around him before, during, and after the trial. And I agree. The people that stuck with Kyle throughout the trial when things looked bleak no longer matter to him. Instead, Kyle is heavily swayed by the celebrity status of people like Tim Pool, Jack Posobiec, Charlie Kirk, and Nick Rakita. How many in here think that Nick Rakita is going to be hanging out with Kyle 5 years from now? Other than having him on his show, who in here thinks that Charlie Kirk wants anything to do with Kyle Rittenhouse? We move on. Shame on the adults that encouraged Kyle to print direct personal attacks against his own family at a time when Kyle is still adjusting to the reality of becoming an adult himself. And one adult that should soak up the lion's share of the blame is his writer, Michael Quinn Sullivan. At one point in the distant past, I offered to write Kyle's autobiography. Like he almost always does, he ignored me. Okay, fine. But then he hooks up with a political lobbyist who writes like it's a high school term paper due the next day in first period English. If Kyle wanted me to print some of the things he wanted to say about his family, I would have told him to get another writer. I have an ethical obligation to my clients. I am not going to help them make the biggest mistake of their lives. Okay, we move on. Shame on the adults that didn't care enough to help Kyle fact-check the numerous false statements in the book, many of which have the potential to negatively affect his civil proceedings, and I would say especially his lawyers. Mark Richards not only approved the book, but also wrote the foreword. Well, what the hell was he thinking? I now question whether his legal team has his best interests at heart. And yes, I have notified Natalie Wisco to tell her about my concerns with the book. I have no idea if my email had any impact at all. All that being said, I've weighed in enough and I have better things to do. I want to end my commentary on a positive note, so I've included what I believe is the best snippet of Kyle's book. In this snippet, Kyle is modest, appreciative, and retrospective as he discusses the strangers ultimately responsible for ensuring he received an adequate defense.
The waiting also forced me to think about the thousands of people I had never met who had made this defense possible. Families had given up something in their lives to give me a chance at having a life. There is no way I could have had a jury consultant without those contributions. There is no way I could have so many people helping me and advising during all those months leading up to the trial. Thanks to people I would never know, I had a bodyguard protecting me and my family from threats I never knew about.
Amen. Although I think that Kyle needs to understand that there were tons of people around who provided something besides monetary support, emotional support. When times were dark, there were still hundreds of people who fought hard to tell the truth about his plight. People like his family, especially his mother, and all the journalists and supporters who thrashed anyone stupid enough to criticize him online. And quite frankly, I don't think Kyle ever really acknowledged them. If I read this right, it appears that David has indeed decided to walk back his warnings and re-examine the role that Kyle's troubles play in his life. If so, I'm glad. I think that's best for all involved. The only losers will be old man Huber and a bunch of lawyers. I'll take that any day. And who in here wants to see Kimberly Motley walk away with a bag of cash? I've said it before and I'll say it again. Once Kyle turns around 25, the smoke will clear and he'll see what this was all about. His celebrity buddies will be long gone. If he hasn't made good choices by then, so will his money. And at that point, he can call me and we'll talk it over and plan a new future. Until that time comes, I can't help him. Like my video and subscribe to my channel.
Portion for purposes of this discussion. Doing earlier.